Hi, everyone. Happy Friday. Microsoft made some noise this week. No surprise there. We're going to get another update from SC24. You're watching Techstrong Gang. Hey, everyone. It's Alan Schimmel with my Santana hat here, but I'm in studio. I usually only wear this on the road. But happy Friday to you. We've got a Techstrong Gang to remember today. We've got some great stuff to talk about. It's gonna be a little more free flowing than some of our usual ones because we don't have Mike Vizard on with us, who usually scripts these out for us. So hopefully John, Camberley, and I won't go too far afield, but it should be fun. Let me introduce you. I already mentioned their names, but want to thank some of our gang members here today with us. First of all, joining us from out in very, very wet Silicon Valley, where they have, what's it called? Some kind of bomb.
An atmospheric river, a bomb cyclone. You know what I call it?
A bomb cyclone. Yeah, that sounds worse than an atmospheric river.
It's a moderate
atmospheric
storm.
River sounds like a Grace Slick album in the early 70s or something. But John Swartz is here with us. Hey, John, welcome and thanks for being here.
Hey, I was going to share something really quickly since we're going to be free-flowing a little bit today. I wanted to thank you, Mike, and Amanda, who I'll work with, because I just signed a book deal to write a book about AI agents, the workplace, and their impacts. And the reason why I'm doing the book is because the publisher reached out to me and said, we've been reading these stories on Techstrong AI. We really like them, and we think this would make a great book, especially the stuff about AI and robotics. So I want to thank you all because you made it possible.
That is terrific. Congratulations.
That's a good, you know what? So as someone and Camberley, you know this, you're a founder too. When you start a business for a lot of reasons. We all want to make money, right? But you also want to kind of do good in the world. Somehow, every founder that's been successful in my career that I've met, and I've met hundreds, if not thousands of them, think in some small way what they do changes the world somehow, makes someone's life better. So the fact that you're going to write a book based upon what we are doing here, that's like, that's pay it forward. It makes my heart feel.
Yeah, this show and website have impacts. They are read by a lot of people. And I heard from an acquisitions editor at the publishing house who said, we really like this stuff and we want to see more of it. And we think there's a book in it. And if I were at my previous employer, none of this would have happened. So thank you very much.
My pleasure, John. And we're thrilled to hear that. And I know you'll write a great book.
The pressure's on.
No pressure. No, look, if it doesn't work out, we'll publish it in serial form on Techstrong AI if they don't like it. But whatever, we'll do what we can. Next with us today, she's joining us from semi-cold Colorado. It's not terrible for the Boulder area. It's only about 34 degrees. Camberley Bates. Hey, Futurum analyst Camberley Bates. Hey, Camberley, how are you?
I'm doing great this morning. A little rough from supercomputing, but we'll talk about that in a bit.
Yeah, I can't wait to hear all about it. All right, let's jump into things. John, you were going to kick us off, I think, with that first.
Sure. Let's talk about Microsoft security because we don't talk about it enough. Maybe there's a reason why. So at the Ignite show this week, Microsoft announced a raft of zero trust tools and platforms, and they put up a $4 million bug bounty in a series of actions that seem to be as much about shoring up their reputation in cybersecurity as fortifying defenses. They seem determined, Microsoft, to make sure cybersecurity is no longer an afterthought. And the context is this. Microsoft's been under intense pressure over its handling of the CrowdStrike incident that resulted in billions of dollars in damage and exposed fundamental architectural flaws in the Windows platform. And Satya Nadella himself has claimed that security is now the company's top priority. And they have the equivalent of 34,000 full-time employees revamping their practices. So they made a tremendous amount of announcements, some of which I think were probably overdue. I was at a Tech Field Day event last night. There was a happy hour, and I talked to several of the people there and asked them for their reaction to the Microsoft news, and they said it was long overdue, and perhaps it will lead to something more positive, although it probably will take a significant amount of time. And so, in a sense, this is kind of a bookend to what happened with CrowdStrike, where, as you recall, at the time, Microsoft was conspicuously silent while CrowdStrike was taking all sorts of heat from everyone, it seemed. So it kind of brings me to this idea, Alan, I mean, you know security well. Microsoft had this reputation of kind of, and I have from personal experience, I've heard this, from just kind of treating this as almost as an afterthought. Is that too harsh an assessment, or is that accurate?
Well, look, this is a deja vu, right? This is a deja vu. Back in, I guess it was around 2005. So remember, Microsoft was late to recognize the coming of the internet, right? And then, boom, it burst on the scene, and they finally built the TCP stack into Windows natively. I think in Windows 99 or something like that, and but their security was horrendous. It was very much like, it was worse than what you're saying. It was an afterthought, and of course, Bill Gates wrote that famous memo, the trustworthy computing memo, and that's why I say it's deja vu, that security was going to be job one for every single employee at Microsoft, and that they started a whole division of what we call trustworthy computing, and that Microsoft was going to be very serious about security. Shortly thereafter, we started seeing Patch Tuesdays, if you remember Patch Tuesdays, and all of these things. And Microsoft, and they went out and spent a fortune of money and hired some of the very best security people in the world. Many friends of mine went to work at Microsoft. They were serious, and that lasted through Bill Gates into the Steve Ballmer row. But they slid back. They slid back into their old habits. And quite frankly, CrowdStrike's just the last black eye they took. SolarWinds, a year or two ago, actually right around COVID, they took a good shot. The president of Microsoft went up and gave the mea culpa to Congress. There's been Microsoft Exchange issues. Look, no one's perfect, and we all have security things, but Microsoft, they needed this new trustworthy computing initiative, because that's what it sounds like to me. So they're talking about really implementing zero trust, which they should have done a long time ago.
Hey, can I mention something really quickly? You mentioned 2005. I have a personal story. So when the last time I wrote a book, which was a long time ago, it was about 16 years ago, we were doing research. And in the course of the research, I had an interview with Bill Gates. This is around early 2007, right after the launch of Vista. And there were questions about security back then. And I remember Gates and Craig Mundy, he was then the chief research and strategy officer for Microsoft, were in this interview. And I remember when I started asking Gates a general question about security, Mundy eagerly tried to answer. And Gates, and I'll show you what he did. He literally put his hand in front of Mundy's face and told him to be quiet. And then said something really that I always remember. Gates said, people talk about things like spam. We could get rid of this overnight. And that, to me, in a sense, kind of encapsulated the dismissive attitude they had about security at the time. So you're right. This is like a pattern. It's been going on for decades.
Took their eye off the ball. But let's get to what they actually said they're going to do. They're going to really go double down on zero trust. Welcome to the party. Better late than never. They are changing. So the way Windows was architected, in order to make certain changes for security things, you had to really get into the kernel, if you will, to make those changes. And they used to use that as a shield why they wouldn't let security companies into the kernel, because something like this could happen. And the courts said, no, you have to let other security companies, not just Microsoft, make changes at the kernel level to enhance security. So Microsoft said, oh, okay, we will. Probably I don't know if they recognized it or not, but it was a reasonable assumption that when I start working in the kernel, if something goes wrong and that kernel goes bad, you're going to have this CrowdStrike type of blue screen of death. And so it was a bad architectural decision. So now they're lifting these security things sort of out of the kernel so that these security companies like CrowdStrike can make the necessary changes they will, without it affecting right at the kernel level. And then I also understand that they've architected that even if you have like a kernel panic, blue screen of death situation, you're not, to make it easier to recover from that than the arcane ridiculousness of what it took to recover from this CrowdStrike blue screen of death thing. More power to them. More power to them. But let's see how long it lasts. You know, they have a real short attention span in terms of rehabilitating their security posture.
Yeah, there was one thing that kind of jumped out. I remember somebody mentioned the biggest change, and it's reference to the kernel. Biggest change of all would let developers build security products that operate in a user mode instead of requiring the kernel mode. But wouldn't something like that take a while to implement? I mean, leveraging those changes.
They probably had this sitting in the wings for years, but
okay.
You know, they don't like to give third-party access to a lot of the inner workings of Windows. It takes, you know, we could talk about, they're not alone, right? Google and others as well on their own platform.
Okay, so this is curious, and I don't know. Thank you very much for educating me on this. This is fascinating. When I was with Veeam a couple of weeks ago at their conference, one of the things they're working on is moving their platform to Linux. They're going to offer both, but it seems that they're in the data protection business, of course, which they're companies, the data security side of the house, and you start to see companies now saying, "Build on Linux. I'm not going to build on that," and maybe that. Much like what we're seeing, with Broadcom's actions, just saying when people start, walking with their feet out the door, that kind of, they say, well, okay, so we need to wake up. And it's not for the goodness of everybody that they're doing this. There is a revenue issue that they're facing that they're getting the heat on. So I would suspect on this situation.
Absolutely. Look, people have been migrating to Linux for security issues
for a long time.
Yeah. And before Linux, it was Unix. I always loved OS too, but what can I tell you? Anyway, I thought it was much more, hands down, much more secure than Windows ever was. But
that was also a major selling point for the Macintosh, right? Or Apple products. They made hay for years about this.
But let's be fair.
Advantages.
When your operating system controls 95% of the market, like they did in the 90s when, Mac was barely alive, you had that big stick where you want to go to Linux, go ahead. You're walking away from 95% of the desktops in the world. Now, Windows is still, I think, about 80%.
Well, and the other piece to that is if you're TAM, as a bad guy, the target TAM.
Yeah, where do you go?
Needs to be Microsoft if you're going to attack something.
Right. Though Mac has garnered a big enough share of market where they do get targeted. You see targeted attacks on Mac OS. And quite frankly, though Linux is, I hate to say the word more secure, but Linux has had less incidents than, let's say, Microsoft or Mac for that matter. But look, we've had problems with bad packages in Linux distros.
Well, and that gets back to saying, is that because the TAM is not that big. So if you're the bad guy, you're going to say, what can I attack? And
what's my lowest hanging fruit for the biggest bang for the buck?
Well, the biggest lowest hanging fruit for the biggest buck. Yes, that's true. So, but that is how I've always seen why Microsoft is the most attacked.
But and I think that's what Microsoft would like you to all tout that
That was
line.
part of their message. That was part of their messaging
Absolutely.
for years. So
And I
when
get it.
Apple would say, "Oh, we're much more secure," Microsoft said, "Of course, the attackers are gonna come here. This is where the money is. Why they're going to the bank
Apple's
where
thing was we're secure by design, right? The other thing I just wanted to mention, and we can move on, is they also announced the biggest bug bounty program ever. I believe like $4 million for bugs, which, for our researchers out there, that's like, Bitcoin mining, right? That's big money. They're off and running, looking for bugs, and bug bounty programs work. I know I have a lot of friends from that side of the house. My friend Katie Mosuris, who actually used to work at Microsoft and started the original bug bounty programs there. Katie,
And even the bug, I'm not sure if you've experienced this at Techstrong, but when I with the Evaluator group, twice over the 10 years, I had somebody, initiate a conversation with me to say,
we found the bug.
We found some things in your website, yada, yada, here. And if you would
Surprised you only got it twice, Camberley. I get it once a month. I mean, but the world has changed.
Well, did you pay that? Did you thank them and pay them some money?
Yes.
Good.
I mean, it's not a lot of money. They're not $4 million bugs. I send them $100, $200, but the world's changed a little bit in that when you look at Techstrong, we don't really have any custom apps. We're running all off-the-shelf SaaS stuff.
Yeah.
So oftentimes when they find a bug, it's usually a configuration issue, or it goes back to the underlying WordPress program or database or something, and then I got to forward it, to WordPress or to our WordPress host. So, but if it's a misconfiguration, we've paid several times because it's well worth the money, in my mind. Anyway, let's take a break on our Microsoft story. We're going to come back, and John, you want to talk about deepfakes?
Sure, let's talk about it.
All right. You're watching Techstrong Gang.
Welcome back to Techstrong Gang. Social platform X last week sued to block a California law that targets AI-generated political deepfakes, months after Elon Musk, its owner and world's richest person and Donald Trump's best friend, claimed the law would make parody illegal, quote unquote. So the lawsuit basically claims that this law in California, which goes into effect next year, violates the First Amendment and would result in the censorship of wide swaths of valuable political speech. The platform X said it has policies in place to moderate, quote, synthetic or manipulated media that might deceive or confuse and lead to harm. However, X includes exceptions for memes or satire, illustrations and cartoons, commentary, and counter speech. Now, will open this up to the gang. What this is interesting to me about is that X's bid is to block the law could be like a litmus test amid a wave of legislation to tamp down on AI-powered election contests, especially deep fakes. More than half the 50 states have passed or are mulling such bills, according to an Axios report. It kind of brings up this whole notion of what is parody and the definition of free speech. And I think it kind of goes down this road that we've been hearing a lot involving social media. And X is trying to put their thumb down on the scale to accelerate maybe attacking laws in different states since there won't be any national law. And I just kind of want to open up to you and ask you what you think about this, especially it coming from Musk and X.
Camberley?
I wouldn't necessarily, I'm not going to focus on Musk and Musk because I believe that part of what X ended up doing opened up a lot of conversation. And we've seen some tapping down even through the last 4 or 5 months coming up into our election of some of the other platforms, which, given what we have in terms of our information that we come into us, that free speech needs to roll, and it shouldn't be tapped down. I understand what he's saying in the parody. I mean, one of the things we've heard over the last year or 2 years from comedians. I mean, Jerry Seinfeld, a whole bunch of others have come out and said, you can't crack jokes anymore. Because if you do, you insult somebody. You can't do comedy anymore. You can't do sarcasm. And that's, part of life is laughing at yourself. I used to make blonde jokes all the time until somebody said, why do you do that to yourself? And I quit doing the blonde jokes. And but I understand part of it, we have to laugh at ourselves. If we don't, it's kind of like, God, this is like a boring life. That is part of it. And parody, the memes that show up, when we have something that happens and we see funny memes and that kind of thing, it gives me giggle. And it gives me giggle on both sides. And just to be very clear, I do listen to both sides. I have podcasts from both sides that and every once in a while I'll be listening to one. I'm like, oh, I can't stand that. And it's like, nope, don't turn it off. Listen to it. Because if it bothers you, look in the mirror. And that is, because when my principle of myself is that if I'm really bothered by something that somebody says, I need to look in my mirror and understand what it is about me that's causing me to get pissed off at that person, because it's usually something internally.
So let me put on my legal hat.
I got the warm and fuzzies today, I guess, is what I have.
Good for you.
We do.
No, but here's the deal. First of all, I think, Camberley, you're right. You need to take Musk out of it. Mm-hmm. Because at this point, anything Musk says has to be looked at through a conflict of interest lens because of his involvement.
Yes.
Right? So you got to take him out of it. But and let's be adults and take him out of it. It's hard for me to be an adult, but let's be adults and take him out of it. Parody is a long-held legal exception to libel, slander. Well, it's not a blanket exception. You can still libel and slander someone by using parody, but it's generally a long-held carve-out. Right? That parody is absolutely part of our free speech heritage here in the United States of America.
Well, Shakespeare, come on.
Well, but in England, you had
comedy plays are all parodies.
Right, but in England, quite frankly, the king could have come in at any time and off with his head. Mm-hmm. Right? It wasn't protected in the common law. It is protected in our Constitution. Mm-hmm. But here's what we're doing. Here's what's going on here. These people are pulling an Animal House Hoover thing. They're they're being brought up on double secret probation charges, and they're wrapping themselves in the American flag of parody. Let's be clear. This bill, or it's now a law because I guess it was signed.
Well, it's going to go on. It's supposed to go into effect in January.
Well, that means it's signed.
Yeah, it's signed by Newsom. He signed it a couple of weeks ago.
Well, that's how laws in California get passed. They go through the legislature, the governor signs them, they're now a law. Right. This law is not aimed at cutting down parody. This law is aimed at mainly political, but it could be other things besides political, deep fakes where misinformation, deception, like they're doing stupid, bad things they shouldn't do. The problem runs into, and this is always the case when you talk, legal kind of principles and balancing, is how do you distinguish between parody versus, Camberley, you get a phone call and it sounds like some older man saying, hello, I'm Joe Biden, and I think we should give Ukraine atomic bombs to blow Moscow out of the planet. And you say, oh my God, fuck it, Joe Biden is crazy. I'm making this up, obviously. Now, and by the way, maybe it's not even a audio call. Maybe it's a video of Joe Biden saying that. And then all of a sudden, the whole world's saying Joe Biden is calling for Ukraine to nuke Russia. And then it's a deep fake planted by Russia themselves or China or someone. And we're going to try to sue them or to stop that, put a prohibition against this. It's a deep fake misinformation propaganda. And Russia says, oh no, don't you have a sense of humor? It was just a parody. That's the issue, right? Anytime you look at these laws, you got to look at extreme examples and then you'll see whether they fly or not. How do you determine parody is the question.
That's always to me the sticking point is how do you define it?
Well, that's absence of malice, right? You got to look at that kind of thing, and this is hard. This is hard because parody is absolutely allowed. Freedom of speech, absolutely allowed. But at what point do you have the right to take someone's likeness and spread propaganda, misinformation, shout fire in a crowded theater?
Well, this is going to be interesting because this will probably make it to the Supremes and will go along the lines of when we talked about pornography. And the classic quote is, I'll know it when I see it.
And that might be the quote that winds up ruling the day here is, I'll know it when we see it. I hate that, though, because that's too wishy-washy for me.
So do I. But then the other flip side of this, I'm not sure if you saw what happened with Google. Google it will no longer take any political ads in Europe. They have said no more because of the laws that they have passed. We can't abide. We can't. They're too flaky or it's too mushy. What does it mean? What is it? So they've just completely pulled out of the political ad business.
You know what? At some level, believe it or not, I'd like to see all of social media pull out of the political ad business.
They are starting.
I think we'd be better off. I think we'd be better off as a society. There are days where I think social media is the worst thing that's happened to us in the last 25 years.
Well, and it's not just the ads. It's because you have all the influencers are making their statements or whatever, and then the broadcasting of it. So it's not, I can understand when you think about what has gotten pulled out, it's just the ads, not the commentary. Not the.
Well, no, I will tell you on Facebook. I mean, right before the election, if you put posts up about politics stuff, they were clamping it down, regardless of whether it was red, blue, white, green. They just didn't want politics.
Facebook has made a concentrated effort to do that, especially after what happened in 2016 and their implications, right? So they have made an effort, as Google has, as you said, Camberley, in a sense, going to censor it, not censoring themselves, but trying to show some sort of discretion. But
we don't want politics on this platform. Right. And is that their right because it's a privately owned platform to do that? Or do they have an obligation to the public to give people freedom of speech? That's the nitty gritty of this. Mm-hmm. If it's my, hey, I don't go ring someone else's doorbell on Sunday morning, right? I don't want you on my porch Sunday morning preaching. And
it's going to be interesting.
Sign on your door like my husband did. He put a sign on the doors. I have voted and submitted my vote. Please.
So go away. Go away.
Go away.
But go play in front of your own house. But I mean, but when you're private home, you could do that. But what obligations does X or Facebook or Google or Apple or any of these folks have to just, because the problem is once you open the door a creak, boom, the whole door goes flying open. You got to let everything in.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And maybe the answer is just keep the door closed.
The wild card in this, though, too, is also what happens if the FCC chair, Brendan Carr, becomes the chair, because he's making noises about lifting Section 230, which protects social platforms from third-party content.
So again, if I'm Mark Zuckerberg or any of these folks, and now all of a sudden I'm faced with liability over what someone else puts on my platform, screw that. I'm not letting anyone put anyone on my platform, put anything on my platform.
You'll eradicate it almost overnight.
And how can you can't at the same time hold my feet to the fire from a liability perspective and not give me the ability to just say, I don't want this on my house. I don't want this in front of my house.
So I guess we won't have parodies on Techstrong.
We always have parodies on Techstrong. We're judgment proof. Oh, no, maybe not with the future. I'm only kidding. Let's not go down that road. But We used to, we occasionally still run them on DevOps.com. Our friend Bob Resselman, used to do cartoons 2-3 days a week. And we had some that were edgy, really edgy, that like, I was, it was a little, we had one time he put, it was a man and woman in bed and just a cartoon drawing of it. And the man is saying, not tonight, I need a rest. And the woman says, I thought you were Mr. Continuous Delivery. and I laughed too when I first saw it. Then I said, oh boy, I don't know how this is going to fly.
Oh, that's great. That's great.
So you got to, but that clearly, parody, take it from where it's at.
Yeah.
There's a thorny issue that has much bigger repercussions than I think just the deepfake stuff.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right. We're going to break here at Techstrong Gang. Let's come back and talk about SC24. We had Guy Courier give us a little report yesterday, but Camberley, we want to hear what you saw.
Right.
You're watching Techstrong Gang.
Discover Techstrong Group, the epicenter of tech innovation. We're your go-to for reaching IT leaders and practitioners worldwide. Our secret? Impactful content that sparks awareness, engagement, and top-quality leads. With us, you'll access editorial websites, streaming videos, virtual events, custom content, analyst research, and more. Join our satisfied clients. Let's revolutionize your tech journey. Contact us today and tell your story to the world in the most powerful way with Techstrong Group.
Hi, guys. I got back last night or yesterday from Supercomputing 24, which was in Atlanta. SC24, I think, is how they branded themselves now. Incredible show. 17,000 people was the number that they said were in attendance. Huge show floor. And let me give you a perspective because I've been going to the show for a long time. And my recollection of when I started going to it, it was about 5,000 people. It was the domain of all the research labs, including the labs that come out of your university. So all the major universities that have research labs, that have supercomputers that are coming from around the world, whether it's Zurich or Texas or Stanford or UCSD, et cetera, that was there, or Harvard even. They were there along with Lawrence Livermore, JPL, those kind of folks that were there. And it was all PhDs. And I used to call them the propeller heads. I'm sorry if I insult you. But it was a lot of
You know what? Those people were not insulted being propeller heads, Camberley. They wore that with pride.
Absolutely.
Well, go ahead. I'm sorry.
And then a lot of PhD graduate students were there. What I would call as the slave people that the professors used in order to maintain their systems on the supercomputers, and why they would use open source so much for it. Anyway, that's changed. And that has changed because the world of Gen AI has entered the enterprise space. It's not like HPC has been in enterprise, oil and gas, pharma, very specific areas where they're doing deep research. But now it's Gen AI, which is a different architecture than HPC. And so it's a totally bigger show. It's not 5,000 people now, it's 17,000 people, which was bigger than KubeCon, right?
Twice the size almost.
Yes. It was, I think there were 45 rows of exhibitors. I logged 7 miles a day, walking back and forth to the show, talking to people. Incredible. And I think that it wasn't just, usually what we saw is a lot of booths with the major universities there, because what they were doing is farming. They were doing business development, getting people to use their computers and their scientists and their PhDs to do research. What we saw this time is a huge amount of vendors and a couple big themes that were there. Number one, liquid cooling is huge. Huge amount of announcements on it. Including, and we can talk about this later, Valvoline was there. The oil people.
Yes.
Right? You had to go, what are you doing there? Okay. That was one. Number two, yes, we're all of a sudden seeing new data systems, new data infrastructure systems, which has always been the domain of the parallel file systems from IBM, Panasys, BGFS, et cetera. We're now seeing new file systems coming in to address the needs, the unique needs of this market space. That's the second piece of it. And then, of course, coming into this, we had a huge amount of announcements from Dell, Lenovo, IBM, HPE, Penguin, you name it. The server business is on fire, bringing out everything from the GPU to the CPU to all those different systems and where they're going with it. So that's gives you a little flavor for what was going on down there. Very, very lively, very active floor.
Interesting. As you said, probably almost twice as many people than KubeCon. Yet KubeCon, I bet you had 90 rows of vendors, because they have a lot of 10 by 10s. They're one half of the KubeCon floor was, the big 40 by 40, 20 by 40 kind of things. But then they had, it seemed like it went on as far as the eye can see, rows and rows of 10 by 10s, all of these little stands of companies, mostly startups, because CNCF, the people behind KubeCon, there's over 180 projects in CNCF right now. So if just every project had a booth, that was 180 booths.
And what you're looking at here, I called it the petting zoo for technologists.
Uh-huh.
There was more. Hardware is a little bit harder to get out the door,
right?
Literally, and so you're talking, and there were quantum computers there.
Were there?
Yeah, the first time I saw a quantum computer was IBM, and that had to be...
Me too. It looked like a cappuccino machine to me. But
the first quantum computer was as big as a room. It was massive. The ones that we saw here were probably I don't know, not quite as about half the size of me. Significantly smaller. And I saw two of them on the floor. There might have been more. One was IBM and the other one was another company. I can't remember who it is, but the quantum computers were there. But that wasn't the story. There was a quantum section there, but quantum is a ways away from coming on board. What's really talked about is the GPUs and all the stuff that's going to drive the GPUs, the Gen AI, the software behind it. Not too much of the software, because there wasn't a lot of ML ops kind of pieces there in those areas. But how do you build these systems and deploy them? So I'll call out also to HPE. They took the number one spot on the HPC compute, which was a system called El Capitan.
Yes.
That was done with AMD to great fanfare. So congratulations to them for their taking the top dog.
So the last 8 top supercomputers were HPE computers is what we had heard about that. John, it looks like you wanted something.
It's interesting, Camberley. A guy, when we were talking to him yesterday, mentioned this huge amount of interest or the larger crowds. He said basically 3 times what you remember a couple of years ago, more vendors. For instance, there are probably significantly more brand name vendors. In a sense, remember, Alan, we were talking about this earlier, this kind of analogy with Black Hats, in a sense, how it blossomed in terms of attendance and in terms of people attending. And again, Gen AI has just kind of spiked what was already an interest, but it's also made it much more visible. It was kind of interesting for you to mention all the vendors that were there. Are they normally there every year, or were there new additions from last year?
Lenovo, HPE, all those guys are always there. But and you had all the parallel file system people there. You used to have some of the tape vendors there, because tape was where we put all that old stuff. But now it's having to be more live, the live data. I think what was increased there is some new and different data store, data infrastructure technology that's there. The infrastructure systems that are providing liquid cool, because that has exploded. I believe Lenovo mentioned on their latest earnings that 25% of the stuff they shipped was liquid cooling this last time around. Huge uptick on that piece of it. So they were all over the place. What's not there? You didn't see security there at all. None of the security data protection is there, which is understandable, because it's still not part of that that community. It will be eventually, but not.
I was saying, what it says, like eventually will be in a couple of years.
When their customers demand it will, and not a day before.
Yeah. So that's
security.
Yeah.
But I think there's a couple of mega trends at play here. First of all, I think, as we mentioned, AI has made hardware cool again, right? Certainly, everyone now gives a hoot about, how many teraflops and MIPS and all of these things that these processors can do. Number two, well, Camberley, when I first came out to Boulder in 2001, there was that whole storage area up near Interlochen, right? Storage Tech, and then going into Interlochen, all the storage, McData and all those folks. And then by about 2005 or 6, maybe 7 at most, they all disappeared, right? Storage became anonymous, it seemed like. Well, storage isn't anonymous anymore. People are happy and proud to stand up and say, I've got 120 terabyte SSD card, right? Which kind of boggles my mind. So storage, hardware is cool. Storage is back out from the shadows. And then we actually have some really big problems in this world that make for great use cases for high-powered computing.
Yeah.
Right?
The other things that you saw, which were still development optics, being used for, some of the networking pieces of it were big, all the networking piece of it. And even like Ayar Labs was just talking about using the optical transfer, to transfer between a processor and the memory, and how that would work and what the design looks like and how, that's a year, but there's multiple of those guys that are on there because just having to speed, that little space right there, how much faster can we make that thing move? And of course we have all the network people there. Although I didn't spend any time with them, but they were all over the place as well.
10 gigabit, 100 gigabit are all becoming real. I mean, it's funny because what you mentioned about the speed between memory to CPU, a lot of people Intel tried to short circuit that. They've all tried to short circuit it by putting memory on the chip, right? And then the computer on the chip is the memory moved to there to take away that millisecond latency that can happen. But now we think we can widen that bus, and we don't maybe have to put all the memory on. We can't put all the memory on the chip because today's uses have so much more memory consumption that, how big can the chip be? Let me ask you, was like the Taiwan chip manufacturers and stuff there?
I am sure they were. I don't recall because I wasn't looking for them.
Yeah, only because they're making noise now.
There was a lot of China there. There's a lot of Asia there. There's a lot of Europe there. There's a lot of EMEA, particularly from Israel, that was present. So yes, I'm sure that they were there, but I can't cite off the top of my head that was once they were.
I think the Taiwanese are, especially with the new administration coming in here, are being very cautious about what they're going to let out of Taiwan, because that kind of is their ace in the hole, right? That you can't let China invade Taiwan because then you'll lose access to those Taiwanese manufacturers and manufacturing. Anyway, it's great that, Guy mentioned yesterday, there is sort of a European version of SC24. It's not called SC.
It's called ISC, and it's held in Germany in June.
Excellent. All right, guys, I think we're about out of time for today's Techstrong Gang. Camberley, thank you for coming on. I know you literally just got in from SC24, so many, many thanks. John, always a pleasure, and congratulations on the book deal.
Thank you.
Author. And we'll be back on Monday with another fresh Techstrong Gang episode with whatever, who knows what'll happen between now and then we could talk about. But we'll talk about it.
We might talk about Google some more.
Yeah. Well, this Google thing.
Oh, wow.
Yes, we'll be talking about that. That's going to be fun. Until then, though, this is Alan Schimmel for Techstrong Gang. Have a great day, everyone.